Hello everyone and welcome to a couple of nice games we're going to cover from yesterday's Freestyle Chess Grand Slam tournament in Las Vegas. They're mostly Blitz, or rather all of the games that we will show are Blitz games, so we're going to go through them real quickly. We don't want to overanalyze Blitz or anything. So the first game we're going to cover is Pragg versus Magnus from Game 3 of their yesterday's match. You've seen what happened in Game 1. Pragg won a very nice game. Magnus went for that queen sacrifice. Then Pragg blundered the bishop. And then all of a sudden Magnus blundered. And Pragg was once again completely winning. In the end, Pragg won Game 1. And a lot of you guys were saying, in the chat, finally, top players playing chess like I play chess. But yeah, even these great players can make mistakes like that. Then in the second game, Magnus retaliated. He won a very nice game and forced further tiebreaks. And this is now the third game. So let's check it out. And we're going to also check out the fourth game and what happened in the final match between Hikaru and Fabiano. So pawn to f4 makes sense, opening up the bishop. Magnus does the same, pawn to f5 and g3. We have bishop to d5, okay, the rook is hanging, you have to defend it. Pragg goes knight f3, and Magnus trades the bishop for knight. Usually not the best idea, but here you mess up your opponent's pawn structure, and you can now just play pawn to e6, pawn to g6, put all of the pawns on light squares, and you have a dark square bishop to use freely in between them. Knight to c3, we have pawn to g6, and queen to e1, where the queen will be more useful. We have bishop to g7, and pawn to d4. We have pawn to c6 and castles queenside. Okay, knight to c7 by Magnus. We have knight to a4 and pawn to d6, stopping any knight to c5 ideas. And Pragg should play pawn to c4 and stop pawn to b5, but I guess he thought, it can't be all that great opening up the pawns in front of your king like that, so he allowed it. He played king to b1, and Magnus did not hesitate. Pawn to b5, played pretty much instantly. Knight to c3 and knight to d7, remaneuvering the knight to b6, and then later on you have a4, c4, d5, all depending on what your opponent plays. Pragg strikes on the king side, pawn g4, knight to b6, and pawn to h4. We have pawn to h5. Magnus says, all right, either open up the g file or, close it with pawn to g5. Pragg says, no thank you, I'm just going to play rook to h2, and now my rook can also get into the attack. Bishop to f6, Magnus puts pressure on the h4 pawn, and Pragg adds another defender. Bishop f2, we have queen d7, developing the queen and preparing perhaps the castle king side, as Magnus has yet to decide where he's going to castle. Rook g2. Pragg says, all right, if you castle king side, I'm then opening up the g file, and I already have a rook on the g file. So Magnus continues the onslaught on the queen side. a5, we have bishop to d3 and pawn to b4. We have knight back to e2, and now knight c to d5. Nicely grabbing the center. Queen to d2 and pawn to a4. Magnus just continuing to push on the queen side. Pawn to c4 by Pragg, and b captures on c3. Now, knight captures is a little bit safer, but Pragg goes b captures on c3, and Magnus goes pawn to a3. And it's not a lost position, but it's very hard to find a way to safely maneuver your king. We have knight to pawn to c4, chasing away the knight, knight back to e7, and now knight to c3. And Magnus could go castles king side, but he goes pawn to d5. He's still waiting to see where he's going to leave the king there. Castle queen side, castle king side. The options are still, available. We have queen to e2 and rook to b8, nicely aligning the rook with Pragg's king, and Pragg goes king to c1. King to a1, a very hard move to play because you go, right in front of that dark square bishop on f6, so king to c1 makes a bit more sense. We have d captures on c4, bishop captures on c4, we have knight captures, queen captures, and now Magnus goes knight to d5. Here, again, you could castle king side. It looks like maybe a little bit dangerous, but the point is after captures, you're just going to ignore that. After rook captures on g6, you ignore it again. And there's really not all that much white can do here. Even rook d to g1, you just ignore it. Queen d6, now you have queen captures on f4, you have rook b2, and this is just winning for Magnus. But he went knight to d5 first, and now Pragg goes g captures on f5. We have queen b7, trying to get the queen over to b2, as that bishop is blocking the rook, and bishop back to e1. Rook d2 can also be played if you want to hide the king behind the rook, but Pragg goes bishop to e1, and now again Magnus should castle kingside first, but he goes for g captures on f5, and here Pragg misses a very nice idea. He misses knight captures on d5, and after e captures just queen d3, and everything is defended. There's no real way for Magnus to go for the attack here. So rather Pragg goes rook to c2. Seems like, okay, we're just gonna hide the king and maybe even, you know, go all the way to f2. But now Magnus is completely winning. He castles kingside, and Pragg goes knight to a4. And the question is, with so little time on the clock, Pragg 4 seconds, Magnus 7 seconds. How do you win this game? And you have only 7 seconds to solve it. No cheating. Have at it. Yes, look at the beautiful geometry. This is the solution. But not knight to e3. Knight to e3 would be a pretty bad move because queen captures on e6 check and you just lose that knight. So I hope none of you were looking at knight to e3. Even though it's a fair assumption, you know, with 7 seconds on the clock. No, Magnus played queen to b1 with check, and after king d2, he sacrificed the queen. Queen captures on d1, but only for one move because you will win it back right after this. King captures on d1, and now knight to e3 check with a triple royal fork. And now his position is just winning. We have king to c1, knight captures on c4, rook captures, and rook f to d8, and Pragg goes bishop to f2. If you capture, then Magnus would happily trade. He's up the exchange, so, you know, Pragg, if anything, wants to keep the rook in the game. Bishop f2, king f7, we have king to c2, and rook to g8. A lot can still go wrong. They're playing on seconds, or rather, they're playing on increment. King d3, we have rook to g2, attacking the bishop, rook to c2, defending, and just rook d8, going after the d4 pawn. We have knight to c5, and Magnus just completely breaks through. Bishop captures on d4. And that's it. If you capture the bishop, then it's a matter of a simple check, and then after king captures, you eliminate the rook on c2. You're up in exchange, of course, completely winning. So Pragg tried knight b7, went after the rook, but it does not help. Rook d5, boxes in the knight, and that's it. It was in this position on move 41 that Praggnanandhaa resigned the game, as there is nothing more to be done here. You're either losing that bishop or you have to play bishop captures on d4, and then it's the exact same problem. Captures, captures, and captures, rook versus knight. And of course, Pragg does not want to play this. So Magnus wins game 3, which is very sad for Pragg, as he won the first game. Magnus retaliated in the second one, and then Pragg just won. Pragg just lost the third one, so we're losing 2 in a row. And now it's Pragg who's in a must-win situation, but it's Magnus who has the white pieces. Can Pragg win with black to force further tiebreaks? Let's see what happens. So Magnus opens with pawn to g3, immediately opening up his strongest piece. Pragg goes pawn to b5 and pawn to f4. We have bishop to b7, attacking Magnus's queen, obviously, and pawn to e4. And the Pragg just goes pawn to c5. It's very interesting that he does not go for pawn to f5. The only reason I can find against pawn to f5 is that as this is blitz 5 minutes on the clock each, Pragg is probably thinking this is the first, even though Pragg knows that this is the best, he probably thinks that's the first move that Magnus checked. He already has something prepared, so I'm going to play, you know, what I consider maybe a second best option, and leave this maybe as a potential threat in the future. d3, we have bishop to b6, and queen to g2. Magnus develops the queen, wants to get her into the game, and again, no pawn to f5. Pragg just continues development. Knight c7. He's just clearing everything, and he wants the castle queen side. Knight to f3. We have pawn to h5, queen to e2, and pawn to d5. We have knight to b3, developing the knight. D captures on e4, D captures, and pawn to c4. Very nicely grabbing more space, opening up both of his bishops. Knight b to d4, and now pawn to h4. Pragg is in a must-win situation, so he has to play active chess. Pawn to c3, h captures on g3. We have h captures, and now queen h3, going after the g3 pawn. Knight to f5, defending on g3, and pawn to g6, trying to kick away the knight to win the g3 pawn, but Magnus already calculated this. Knight to g5, attacks Pragg's queen, queen back to h8, and now knight to d4. And here Pragg just castled queenside. He misses a very interesting move, but yeah, under these circumstances, I don't think this is something anyone finds. The move is pawn to f6. And I mean, look at this. Pawn to f6, you're inviting the knight to e6. And then after knight e6, captures, you're attacking the rook. But here comes queen to h3, attacks g3 and attacks the knight. Now, if you capture the rook, this comes with check. You cannot block on f2, as the bishop covers that as well. And after, let's say, rook d8 check, king to c2, you will capture on f8. And that white king is looking terrible on c2. So this would be winning for black. What you could do after queen to h3 in such a situation is play queen g4, and now after a queen trade, captures and captures, you attack the bishop, and after the bishop moves, you just go rook h8, and the game continues with Pragg solving all of his problems, and he has a very, very nice position. But yeah, blitz. We have castles queenside, bishop to e3, and here pawn to e5. Knight to f6 is a little bit better for Pragg, but yeah, when you have to win the game, you also have to give your opponent chances, and by playing pawn to e5, Pragg does just that. F captures on e5, queen captures on e5, and now knight captures on f7. Forking the queen and the rook here, and Pragg goes queen captures on g3. Rook captures on f7 is better, but yeah, Pragg has to win. So queen captures on g3. We have bishop to f2 attacking the queen, and queen to not queen to h3. Queen to h2 was played, obviously h2. And knight captures on d8. Here, king captures on d8, and Magnus is now completely winning, but there is one particularly painful way that, he can finish the game for Pragg. What did Magnus play here? Magnus, again, okay, this time it's Pragg who has 5 seconds, Magnus almost 2 minutes. What do you play here with white? Find the absolute best move while I give you a couple of seconds. The spectacular knight to e6 check. This is what Magnus played, and he was in this position on move 21 that Praggnanandhaa resigned the game, as there is nothing more to be done here. Once or you don't capture and you give up the rook, that's one possibility, and the other one is if knight captures knight on e6, then look at this, bishop captures on b6 comes with check, and you blunder the queen. Queen captures on h2, and Pragg would be without a queen. So yeah, knight e6, beautifully played. Both the games beautifully played by Magnus. He just had that weird first game, where no idea what was happening there, as if someone's uncle was playing against him, or rather instead of him. And then, just 3 games, he just beat Pragg and nicely qualifies. In the next match, Magnus faced Arjun Ergesi. He defeated him in both games, and he qualified for the main event, sort of. He will not be playing for first place. That honor belongs to Hans Niemann and Levon Aronian, but he will be fighting for third place. And to see against who, we first have to check out who won in the match, Fabiano Caruana versus Hikaru Nakamura. So their first 2 rapid games ended in a draw, and now we go into blitz tiebreaks. Let's see what happened. It's a really weird game, but as usual, those are the ones we enjoy best. So pawn to d4, and again, pretty standard setup. Even though the pieces are scrambled, it's not that weird anymore. I will mention if something is particularly interesting, or if you guys find something that's particularly interesting in a certain position, also be sure to share. But okay, we have pawn to d4, pawn to b5, opening up the rook. So opening up the queen, opening up the rook. The standard rules apply as in regular chess. We have knight to d3. Pawn to d6. We have pawn to c4, b captures, we have queen captures on c4, and knight to f6. Again, you can simply castle kingside when the king and rook are on f8 and g8, so you can just castle, not a problem. We have knight to g3 and pawn to h5. We have pawn to h4, knight to g6, and rook to h1. Not ready to castle. The rook is needed to defend the h4 pawn. We have bishop to d5, chasing away the queen, queen to a4, now putting pressure on a7, and pawn to c5, saying, okay, if you really wanted that pawn, you can capture it, but if you capture that pawn, then rook a8, and okay, you lose the queen. So after c5, d captures on c5, we have d captures and pawn to b3, pawn to c4 by Hikaru, and now knight to e5. So what do you do here? Well, okay, Fabi just trades, knight, or rather Hikaru trades, knight captures, bishop captures, we have bishop to c7, bishop captures and queen captures, we have pawn to e3, and c captures on b3. Other moves are of course possible, but yeah, this is blitz, so we're not going to overanalyze anything. We have captures, pawn to g6, and king to g1, getting the king to a bit of a safer square. We are fighting against a light square bishop after all. King g7. And now, so you could also castle, but the king could be even safer on g7. Pawn to e4 and the bishop to e6. We have queen to d4, beautifully centralizing the queen, and rook g to d8, forcing the queen to move, queen to e3, and pawn to a5. We have pawn to e5, going after Hikaru's knight. We have knight to d7, and queen to g5. Fabi ready to go for some knight captures on h5 action. So queen captures on e5 and knight captures on h5 with check. We have king to g8, and here knight to f4. And interestingly, there is only one move here that wins for Hikaru, and it perhaps is not the first one that comes to mind. So have at it. What would you play here? Hikaru played bishop to f5. And it's a move that stops Fabi's attack with tempo as the rook on b1 is hanging, and there's nothing you can do about it. If you just go h5, Hikaru captures, and you don't have an attack because your queen will be attacked once again. So you have to deal with the rook hanging. Rook to c1, and now just knight to f6, stopping any pawn to h5 ideas. Bishop to f3, and now rook d to c8, offering a trade of rooks. We have rook to d1, Fabi avoids it. Rook captures on b3. And now Fabi has to win in the attack. Otherwise, if he trades down, then he's just fighting against Hikaru's passed a pawn, which is also an extra pawn. Hikaru has 4 pawns, Fabi has 3. So not looking good for Fabi. We have pawn to h5, going for all or nothing, and Hikaru plays it correctly. Knight h7 attacks the queen. We have queen to h6, and now the only move that wins, but it's not that difficult to spot, as all you have to do is prevent the opening of the g file. Pawn to g5. Nicely defended by the knight. We have knight back to e2, and now rook d3, forcing trades, as you just need to trade everything, and your extra a pawn is winning. And this is game 4. Hikaru also won game 3 of the blitz tiebreak, so Fabi has to win this one in order to force further tiebreaks. A draw is simply not enough for Fabi here. Rook captures on d3, bishop captures on knight g3, allowing king h2 if rook to c1 lands. But of course, Hikaru goes for it. Rook c1 check, king to h2, just trading further down, captures, and queen to f6, forces a queen trade. He traded all of the rooks, and now Fabi just resigns here, as there is nothing more to be done here. Maybe with some incredibly precise play, you could even draw this, not objectively, it's lost, but even if Fabi could draw it, it wouldn't really matter, as he needs a win to force further tiebreaks. So he just resigned here. Once the queens get traded off, you're just fighting against Hikaru's a pawn, and there is no way you're winning with this with white. Like I said, you may get a draw, but a draw simply is not enough. So yeah, very interesting game, and Hikaru eliminates Fabi, and it will be Magnus versus Hikaru in the finals. But in the finals for third place, the actual final for first place belongs to Levon Aronian and Hans Niemann. And if someone told you that those four players are in the main event, it's hard to say that anyone would ever say that maybe it will be Magnus versus Hikaru for third place, but that's the reality of things. And it will be very interesting. Also, Magnus in the final of the lower bracket, Magnus defeated Arjun Ergesi. He defeated him in both games, and we'll see what happens in the Hikaru versus Magnus clash. But I'm sure everyone is waiting for the real clash, which is Levon versus Hans. So those were the games. Hope you guys enjoyed it. A very nice comeback by Magnus against Pragnananda. Hikaru playing incredible chess altogether. Very, very strange that he didn't. He's not the one playing in for first place. But Levon said, "No, I don't care who you are." He eliminated everyone. And I think, I'm just very much looking forward to seeing what happens in the Levon versus Hans final. Who do you have as favorite? I mean, it's hard Hans is playing incredibly, but Levon eliminated Magnus, he eliminated Hikaru, and he eliminated Arjun. So, yeah, very, very, very hard to pick a pick a player there. I'm going with Levon, as he's much older, and you always want the members of the older generation to win, as he might not be playing tomorrow, but also it would really make waves in the chess world if Hans just wins another event. He's been winning events left and right, online and offline. So yeah, a lot to look forward to. Hope you enjoyed it. I would like to thank Paul Hinamund, Ricardo Cardona Lopez, James White, Robert Pande, and Christian Medical and Professional Services for your contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing to check up on your wonderful suggestions and whatever else happens in the chess world. Thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.